Go into any bookstore, walk over to the religious section, look at the Christian books. Thousands upon thousands of Christian books. I'm going to let you in on what that tells you about Christianity in this video edition of the Godless Anti-Theist. Thousands and thousands of books. The Left Behind series. It seems every televangelist got a book for sale. You got bookseller after bookseller on these Christian shows. Read their books, yes. You must read their books and get closer to God. Now, think about this. Christians claim the Bible is the Word of God. Let that sink in. Christians claim the Bible is the Word of God. Let it sink in. Think about it. The Word of God. God itself has written a book. And that's not enough for Christians. The Bible, which is supposedly the Word of the God that created the universe, is not enough. You got to read all these other Christian books. The Left Behind series. And then they have books that explain the Bible because their God is too stupid to write his book so that you can understand it. You got to go to Sunday school and have a Sunday school teacher explain to you what the Bible means. Go verse by verse. You got to go to church on Sunday and the preacher preaches you the Word of God, gives you the verse, and then tells you what it means. Because God was too stupid to write it down so that you could understand it. Not only was he too stupid, this God of theirs, to write it down where you could understand it, he wrote it down in Hebrew, a language you can't even read, and you don't even bother to learn to read. You have a book written in Hebrew that is the Word of God according to your beliefs as a Christian. But you can't be bothered. You can't take the time to learn to read Hebrew. So the Bible is translated very badly into English. And you read that. Then came along King James, a homosexual, by the way. And he didn't like the Bible. So he had scholars write the Bible to his approval. So you're not only not reading the Word of God, but you're reading the King James Version of the Word of God. You're not reading the Word of God in the original God language. You're not reading the original English version because some homosexual king didn't like it. So he had it rewritten for his approval. It's called the King James Version of the Bible. How many Bibles do you have out there? You have the American version. There's 20,000 versions of this Bible written in billions of languages because it just wasn't written down right the first time by God. And we can't take the time out to learn Hebrew, not us Americans, not us Christian Americans. We're going to read it in its translated version because we can't bother to learn what God said to us in Hebrew. And not only do we not read it in Hebrew, but it's not good enough for them. It's not good enough for them. They got to go out and read the Left Behind series, and this preacher's book, and this preacher's book, and this religious scholar's book. There's a guy out now that's a Muslim who's written a book about Jesus, the life of Jesus, because apparently the Word of God's account of the life of Jesus isn't enough. God wrote the Bible, is their claim, and it's not good enough. And he wrote this Bible in Hebrew, and it's not interesting enough or important enough to learn Hebrew so you can read what God intended in God's own words in his own language. And there's Jewish preachers, rabbis, I guess they call them, and they spend their entire lives wailing back and forth, reading over this book, because it's so complicated. It's so complicated. And they spend their lives doing nothing but reading this book. Nice job if you can get it, I guess. And then they tell you through this wailing back and forth and reading over this book and thinking about what it means. And then they tell you what they think it means. Because I guess you're just too stupid, or God wasn't smart enough to write this in Hebrew so that you could understand it. And apparently, you can't read Hebrew. You know, God doesn't make, when you're a Christian, God doesn't automatically make it where you can read Hebrew and understand it. No, you're just as stupid as you were before you accepted Jesus Christ into your heart. You can't even read the Word of God in its original language. And you claim to know what God said when you're not even reading the original text. It's a translation. And virgin is in the original Hebrew simply the word woman, not virgin. They're fucked up all the way. And even this book that they believe is the Word of God, this English version, is not enough for them. They have the Word of God, they claim. And yet they have to read other books because the Word of God isn't good enough for them. Yet you're supposed to swear on a Bible when you go to court. You swear to tell the truth on this Bible that's not good enough. That Christians read other books, and there's chick tracts and other kinds of paraphernalia, reading material about what God said. Because the Word of God, the Bible, isn't enough. It's not complete. It can't be understood by the average person. You got to read chick tracts and this Jesus comic book and watch Gumby on TV. Because you can't get your morality from the Word of God. What is claimed to be the Word of God. And you and I, we atheists, we know it's bullshit. And they prove it's bullshit every day when they show you that the Bible isn't good enough for them. They have to read other books by other Christian authors. Because the Word of God isn't good enough. They have a book that they claim God wrote, and it's not good enough. They look for outside sources for their confirmation of their superstition. And they want you to put your hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth. They want you to read the Bible. Oh, if you're an atheist, but have you read the Bible? Have you read the Word of God? Well, you have, Christian, and it's not good enough for you. You got all kinds of books that you read. because the Word of God isn't good enough for you. The Word of God, you can't understand it, so you got to go to church on Sunday and have the preacher read you a verse and then tell you what it meant. And then it's not a good enough book to read from page 1 to the end. No, your preacher will bounce around from book to book to book within the book of the Bible, from chapter to chapter to chapter, to explain himself. And then he tells you what all these, how they all fit together and what they mean. Because the Word of God is very complicated. And you're never going to understand it by yourself. So go to church, send your kids to Sunday school. It's very, very all complex. Yes. Because God wasn't smart enough to write it down where you could understand it. And he didn't even know you were going to speak English. He thought everybody was always going to speak Hebrew. So he wrote it down in Hebrew, a language you can't speak. That's how smart he was. He didn't write down a Hebrew version and then go write down a American version, English version. And then he didn't go write it down in Spanish. No, he wrote it down in Hebrew and said, if you want to speak another language, you're going to have to translate it. And poorly at that. Because the word virgin in the English version of the Bible simply means woman in the Hebrew original version. But you can't take time to learn Hebrew. I mean, it's just the Word of God. Who's got time to learn what God said? Who's got time to learn what God said? You don't go to church and your preacher starts speaking and reading the Bible in Hebrew because you don't know Hebrew. You can't be bothered. You got too many things to do. So they translate it for your lazy ass into English because you can't be bothered to find out what God said in his own language. But he's the creator, and you better know what he said. Yet you can't be bothered to know what he said. You speak English, and it's just too much of a requirement to speak the language of God, Hebrew. It's so much bullshit. It's so filled with lies, bold-faced lies. And they're such bold-faced liars, right to your face. Read the Bible, although don't bother learning Hebrew. It's just the Word of God, after all. Yet if you don't know the Word of God, well, you don't know the Word of God. You only know a translation, and a very poor translation it is. If there's a hell, I'll see you there, Christian. If there's a hell, you're going to be there, burning right along with me. But I'm sure that's not going to get you to learn Hebrew. No. Yeah, you're saved. Don't worry about it. Till next time, this is a crazy fucking world. Be careful out there and be well. Until next time, this has been the Godless Anti-Theist Video Edition. The Word of God, they can't bother.